Detroit Lions may be perceived as being one of the worst NFL franchises, which is unfortunate for the NFL team that plays in the Motor City. That's because Detroit was quite successful in the 50s and additionally during the 90s when they were one of the most exciting teams, but their success 2 decades ago has been easily forgotten. 90s Sports Nostalgia presents the Detroit Lions in the 1990s, the original greatest show on turf. And don't forget to kindly subscribe, give us a like, and check out more 90s Sports Nostalgia material. The story of the Detroit Lions in the 90s starts with Duane, the former Michigan State defensive back, took over during the season in 1988 as interim head coach of the Detroit Lions, finishing with 2 wins and 3 losses. Nonetheless, the interim tag was removed, and Fonts was about to begin an interesting ride as head coach of the Lions. He made Darryl Mouse Davis his offensive coordinator, who is known as the godfather of the run-and-shoot offense. This offensive aerial philosophy, with 4 wide receivers and a lone back, in ways was revolutionary at the time, and its concepts had led to the way the passing game has evolved into its present form today. Furthermore, in 1989, Detroit drafted running back Barry Sanders. Skepticism surrounded Davis's offense as if it was the right system for Sanders because of the lack of a fullback and a tight end to block. However, it could be argued that the run and shoot was perfect for Sanders because his spontaneous running style would allow him to use his moves and instincts with the more space available. Nevertheless, we all know Sanders had tremendous success early on in his career, but the Lions went 7-9 in 1989 and then 6-10 in 1990. One problem was the inability to solidify the quarterback position during these 2 years with signal callers like Bob Gagliano, Eric Hipple, Rodney Peete, and Andre Ware, who ran the run and shoot in college. This issue of playing quarterback roulette would be a theme during the Fonts era. Enter the 1991 season. Mouse Davis moved on to the World League, but new offensive coordinator Dave Levy was going to continue with the run and shoot. Rodney Peete was a starting quarterback, but after tearing his Achilles in October of that season, little-known Eric Kramer took over as the QB. The former Canadian League football player would unexpectedly guide the Lions to 6 straight wins to finish the 91 season with a 12-4 record and a first-round bye in the playoffs. Finishing the season strong would also be a theme during the Fonts era. Detroit's first playoff game in the divisional round was a blowout win against the Dallas Cowboys, 38-6 in the Pontiac Silverdome. Eric Kramer was in the zone, and the defense, which was led by linebacker Chris Spielman and safety Benny Blades, stifled the young Cowboys. Unfortunately for Detroit in the NFC Championship game, the Lions lost on the road to the eventual champions, the Washington Redskins, 41-10, who were coming off a 24-7 win against the Falcons, who also ran the run and shoot. But the future seemed so bright for the Lions. They had Barry Sanders, they had seemed to find a solution at quarterback, and Detroit had success in terms of drafting and developing Pro Bowl caliber players during this period, with players like Chris Spielman, Jerry Ball, Benny Blades, Lomas Brown, Kevin Glover, Robert Porcher, Luther Ellis, and Herman Moore. The Lions also had an all-pro kick return specialist in Mel Gray on the roster. Unfortunately, the 1992 season didn't go as planned, as the productivity on both sides of the ball decreased greatly and the revolving door of quarterbacking continued. Moreover, with Henning as the new offensive coordinator, the team didn't run the run-and-shoot offense but did run a Don Coryell-like passing scheme, but it wasn't as productive as the previous season. Subsequently, the run-and-shoot did return in 1993, and Detroit made a bold move by acquiring all-pro Saints outside linebacker Pat Swilling for draft picks. Duane still continued his pendulum style of decision-making with the quarterbacks, and it kept getting worse, shuffling in and out Peete, Ware, and Kramer. In early October, Fonts decided to finally stick with Peete, saying, "Rodney Peete is the guy. We're going to put a saddle on him and ride him for the rest of the season." But after a bad loss to the Vikings, Kramer regained his position as a team starting quarterback. Moreover, offensive coordinator Dan Henning was replaced by Dave Levy. Despite all this adversity in 1993, the Lions did win the NFC Central Division title with a 10-6 record, winning 3 out of their last 4 games. A home playoff game against the Green Bay Packers was on the horizon, but it was this iconic throw by Brett Favre in the final minute that sealed the victory for the Packers, ending Detroit's championship aspirations. For Fonts' first 5+ seasons as head coach of the Lions, it's perhaps harder to find a coach who mismanaged the most important position in football worse. Those 3 quarterbacks who Fonts continued to shuffle in and out of the lineup all found new homes for the 1994 season. Without a quarterback, but in the new era of NFL free agency, The Detroit Lions decided to sign a QB who previously wore neon green for the Orlando Thunder of the now defunct World League and helped the Miami Dolphins start 9-2 in 1993, only to lose their final 5 games and miss the playoffs. During the 1993 season, Dolphins Hall of Fame quarterback Dan Marino ruptured his Achilles tendon in a Week 5 game and thus was lost for the season. Backup quarterback Scott Mitchell showed flashes of being a solid quarterback. In fact, the Utah product was the NFL Player of the Month in October. The Lions then signed Mitchell to a 3-year, $11 million contract, which at the time was a large amount of money. However, Mitchell threw more interceptions than touchdowns in 1994, while only posting a 4-5 record as a starter. It was 36-year-old Dave Craig who went 5-2, helping Detroit finish 9-7, winning 5 of their last 6 games and earning a playoff berth. But in cruel playoff fashion once again, the Lions lost in their wildcard matchup to the Packers 16-12 in a game where Barry Sanders had 13 carries for -1 yard. For the upcoming 1995 season, there shouldn't be too much of a dark cloud hanging over Detroit. The talent was still there on both sides of the ball. Enter new offensive coordinator Tom Moore, who would run a 3-wide receiver Don Coryell type of an offense. But what about the Lions quarterback, Scott Mitchell? Detroit and Mitchell got off to a rough start, losing their first 3 games, but after a win against the defending Super Bowl champs, the San Francisco 49ers, the offense began to slowly find their groove, which led to Detroit finishing the season on fire, winning their last 7 games en route to a 10-6 record. The 95 Lions are one of the most explosive teams in history, and a big part of that was due to the improved play of Scott Mitchell. Now, I know a lot of people like to beat up on the left-handed quarterback, but Mitchell really had a tremendous season in 1995, throwing for 4,338 passing yards and 32 touchdown passes, which are numbers that very few quarterbacks reached back then. In addition, Herman Moore set the record at the time with 123 catches in a season and added 1,686 yards receiving, which was the 4th highest total in a season at the time. Brett Perriman caught 108 balls, and it was the first time in NFL history that 2 teammates had at least 100 receptions in a season. Johnny Morton was productive with 8 touchdowns and was perhaps the best number 3 wide receiver in the NFL at the time. And of course, Barry Sanders was solid and explosive once again, with another 1,500-yard season and being named as an All-Pro once again. Even though the Lions finished second in the NFL in terms of points scored in 1995, there were moments where it seemed like Detroit was unstoppable, especially during the second half of the season. With this explosiveness being on display, Detroit was quite a frightening team entering the playoffs. In fact, with their playoff matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles, they were a 3-point favorite. This is quite rare for a road team to be a favorite in a playoff game. Unfortunately, Scott Mitchell did not play well at all during this game, throwing 4 interceptions. At one point, the Eagles were up 51-7, and to make matters worse, it was former Lions quarterback Rodney Peete who led the Eagles' rout on the Lions. During the 1995 season, Peete looked to be more comfortable running John Gruden's West Coast offense than he ever did running the run and shoot. The 1996 season kind of had an ominous beginning as Detroit's defensive leader and tackling machine Chris Spielman left Detroit and signed with the Buffalo Bills. As for the rest of the Detroit Lions, Scott Mitchell didn't quite have a successful season, throwing just as many touchdowns as interceptions. Barry Sanders, Herman Moore, Brett Perriman, and Johnny Morton still had productive seasons, but the Lions went 1-9 down the stretch, finishing with a 5-11 record. Consequently, the Fonts era would come to an end. Enter Bobby Ross to coach the Lions for the 1997 season. The former San Diego Chargers head coach was the complete opposite of Fonts. Ross was a no-nonsense disciplinarian, while Fonts was more of a player's coach. In 1997, Detroit was 4th in the league in points scored, largely in part to Barry Sanders' 2,053-yard season. It can be argued that Sanders had his best season because he had a fullback to lead block, but that's difficult to precisely conclude. Once again, Detroit made it to the playoffs with a 9-7 record, only to lose to an up-and-coming Tampa Bay Bucs team 20-10. Detroit then went backwards in 1998 with a 5-11 record, which included Scott Mitchell being replaced by rookie quarterback, and 1998 would also be the last season for all-world running back Barry Sanders. In late July of 1999, Sanders made the shocking announcement less than 1,500 yards shy of breaking Walter Payne's all-time rushing record. Theories and rumors began to circle around the sports world as to why Barry Sanders retired, because it was so sudden and unexpected. Maybe the direction of the team and the moves within the front office affected Sanders' decision, but according to the NFL Network's of Football Life, Sanders simply said, "I just felt like I had run out of steam. In that 10th year, I just felt like that was my time. That was it. I had enough." The Lions did get back to the playoffs again in 1999 with an 8-8 record, only to lose to the team that gave the Lions their first playoff loss in the 90s, the Washington Redskins. When I think about the Lions in the 1990s, I think about how hard it is to win a playoff game in the NFL. The Lions had a lot of talent on the roster during this period, but only had one playoff win in the 90s. In actuality, their 1991 playoff win against the Cowboys is their only playoff win during the Super Bowl era, and it was against a team that wound up winning 3 of the next 4 Super Bowls after that loss. As for being called the original greatest show on turf, I do understand that may sound a little crazy, but I feel like the Lions in the 1990s deserve more respect for how talented they were on offense. I mean, they were really potent. Vikings fans might think some of those Minnesota teams in the mid-90s were the original greatest show on turf. Interestingly enough, both the Lions and Vikings had very similar personnel on offense. The only difference was that Minnesota had more production and consistency from the quarterback position. But back to the Lions, we all know about Barry Sanders' greatness. But wide receiver Herman Moore is often forgotten. For a short period of time, Moore was arguably the best wide receiver, and Brett Perriman is arguably the best number 2 wide receiver. I just feel like the Lions in the 90s should be given more respect. The St. Louis Rams, who are the greatest show on turf, were incredibly consistent from 1999 to 2001. If Scott Mitchell performed like he did in 1995 during the 1994 and 1996 seasons, the Detroit Lions would have been remembered as having one of the greatest offenses ever.